Hello, hello, hello! Welcome to Open Source episode 26. And I'm absolutely delighted to have returning the suave Rory Unsworth.
Hi, everyone.
And the newly bearded Mark Simpson. Excellent. So, Mark, how about you kick it off and tell us what is it in the news that you found interesting this week?
Sure. So, apologies for the COVID beard. I'm just getting over it, so I will get rid of it to mark that. But like everybody else, I guess I'm jumping on the bandwagon that the Associated Press news agency in the United States has been publishing the incoming results from the November the 3rd elections on the Ethereum and the EOS blockchain. So the results are all being written onto the Everpedia Oracle Q software's blockchain. So the results are all being published there. And we know it's been one of the most controversial, I guess, elections in decades. And I'm not going to comment on, size, but what's been interesting is obviously the 100 million votes that were cast early because of mail or in person during the coronavirus pandemic, which has certainly upset an individual. And it could take some weeks to decide the results, quite frankly. And lots of people are looking at what it means. But what I think is really interesting is, the press putting it onto blockchain. I think that's a real statement about the media, about the control of information, about fake news, about all these other things. So that's been a really interesting piece of signaling from the press then, I'd say.
But also, Mark, if I may, the proof that it's not blockchain that's going to restore trust there. The trust will be broken anyway. I agree with you. It's a very interesting statement, but it's the actions that undermine it. The technology can't of itself provide the trust, right?
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, I mean, that's a deeply felt thing, trust. I mean, yeah, certain things can appeal to us from an intellectual level, but what we've already seen is the responses from people have been emotional in every sense. The intellect is one thing, but there's a deep visceral sense. We've seen huge tribalism about this great division, and I'm certainly not preaching from the UK. So I think, for example, the UK it's a bit like American TV series. Yeah, so it shows in the US first, and then 9 months later we get to air it. So maybe the same thing will happen here, but you're absolutely right, Rory. It's a deep visceral sense of what's right and what isn't.
Indeed, completely agree. Rory, your turn. What are you going to talk about this week that you find interesting?
Well, my lead is storytelling. So I read a brilliant article by Liz Lumley, who's from Startup Bootcamp FinTech. And her article was around lessons for people in the insurtech community and really the value of storytelling to drive tech innovation. And what I notice is that so many of us try to sell tech projects to sponsors on the basis of dry efficiency type statistics. And, that begs the question, what is the real impact of your tech project on people, on clients, on internal personas? Is there a social justice angle? Is there a human angle somewhere? It might not be the one most on the surface, but is there somewhere within your project something like that? And I bet there probably is, because there's no other reason for you to be passionate about your project than that it has a human impact. So that's really an interesting raise by this Liz Lumley. And the other question to ask yourself, of course, is why now? Why is it relevant and pressing now? And she captures that beautifully by talking about a conference speech she changed at the last minute after Donald Trump's 2016 election to talk about the continued pressure that women feel in the world and how fintech can help them, using a real story from, I think, Malawi or somewhere, of a woman under pressure that fintech helped with her banking problems. So it's hard to explain in detail without spoiling it. So I'll just link it on the thread. It takes about 5 minutes to read it. And I hope it's as good for you as it was for me. And don't forget, the lesson is tell stories.
It's fascinating because I remember a project I worked on, which was about building an app to help individuals reach financial well-being. And when we were doing a lot of our research, we would ask the potential customer, what does money mean to you? And for some, it's that envelope that comes through the letterbox that says, I've got bills to pay. And that brings fear. you know. For others, it's, you know, my interaction with money is when my husband is asleep and I'm with my mobile phone, you know, looking through different statements and you know, and worrying about it. And that's like, I think, you know, a lot of where the tech projects fail also is on that basic human interaction, you know, and think, well, what is it that we're trying to resolve here? And what does it mean from an emotional characteristics? And if you do those research correctly, you can actually use those same words within your branding, within your marketing messaging, within even your interface. You know, for example, when we designed the interface, instead of having a white background, we had a dark blue background. So that when they're looking at it at night, they don't have the white light shining in their faces. You know, it's simple things like that. When you think about product design, that is important.
Absolutely. I mean, UX is one thing, right? But Mark sent me a really interesting article today around Lloyd's and their attempt to obviously revamp their processes. And the sort of headline, what it was all attached to was a 3% efficiency gain. And the point is, that's not the point, right? Yes. The point is that if you don't do that 3% efficiency gain or whatever it is, everyone in the Lloyd's market loses their job because it's so frictional. A lot of people who are getting insurance in the world, you know, this type of, that's the real background. It's not a 3% number for the CFO. It's really for the people, for the customers, for society.
And we're back to almost your previous point, Rory, with having a higher emotional content. So, you know, we're so preconditioned on the business case to talk about gain and pain, but we often do that through an economic piece. And intellectually, it can all make sense. But I think we've been desensitized to it. And actually, yeah, what is it that you can emotionally hook into? And it can be an and, not an or. So it's not to say we suddenly move from everything quantitative and everything that's hard numbers based, but why can't we include an emotional impact in terms of the effect as well? My own theory on that is that will then help already when we're starting to think about the change. And people, you know, the big old myth that change is hard and people are resistant to change is one of the biggest myths in the world. It's generally because it's poorly managed and there isn't emotional content because people haven't empathized. And back to Walid's point, when you build up some empathy with the people involved, you can start to think about the execution in ways that really speak with that. So it does all kind of fit together really neatly.
Well, Mark, I'm glad to have met someone who thinks that corporate change is easy. I'm going to come back to you on that one.
So, Mark, thank you for that, Rory. Mark, tell us, what is it in the news that made you wonder this week?
So it was an article that came out at the start of the week. So it's the second year it's come out. So the World Trade Organization and Trade Finance Global, they produced last year, if you recall, this taxonomy of blockchain projects and international trade, and they presented it in what they called a periodic table for the industry. So at the start of this week, they came up with an update. And what was interesting was on a scale of 1 to 5, the project maturity last year was assessed on average of 2.3, whereas the update this year was 3.3. And that really translated, if we're coming away from numbers, back to my last point, is the projects are now between what they call early stages of production and they're being live and they're running. So that's really the stage that we're moving at. So far more into the productive stage. What was interesting is as they start to think about what's going to happen from a scaling point of view, so how can we scale this up, they found that some of the problems were actually around legal challenge, so something, Roy, you might be more than interested to delve into, the lack of standards and governance issues really were what they felt got in the way in terms of moving on that. And again, they keep appearing, don't they? Legal, standards and governance, and particularly standards and governance are there. So how do we keep up to speed with that? And what it also, went to highlight is any digital process, and we're all obsessed at the moment with running to digital, is only as strong as the least digital link.
Yes.
So what they found in international trade was it was around customs and operations, but actually it got me thinking about, so I wonder what in the insurance industry is our least digitized link. And I know we talk about legacy all the time, but what is it that is that weakest link for us? And again, when I looked at it this year, and there was a low instance of insurance cases, so is there a need for an insurance industry specific table? and maybe we could adapt our Miro board into a periodic table approach as well. And there's maybe something we can do to assess the insurance industry specifically. So if people are interested in that, let us know. And if there's enough demand, we'd love you to help us build that up.
Excellent, excellent, and good call. And also, you know, for you, the listeners, we'll put a link to the interview we did with Emmanuel Gann from the WTO, the co-author of this report a few months ago. We've also invited her to come back onto the show, hopefully before the end of this year, to give us an update to that report. Rory, could you tell us what is it in the news that made you wonder?
Well, what I hated this week was the death of many, many millions of mink. It's totally unrelated to it, but I think you may be aware of this in Denmark. They had this terrible, terrible problem. But this is totally changing the subject. Let's get back to standards.
Side note.
And that's really my theme as well. So Mark had it as his, it's also mine, and it's to do with the Ant IPO. I mentioned it last week. Ant is a financial company with basically a tech financial company in China doing mostly micro lending, and it's planning the biggest IPO in the history, avoiding all Western stock markets, and that's why I mentioned it last time. But this week, Chinese regulators have put it on pause because they say that there are major issues, including on the tech side, and Ant is powered by a blockchain. And my wonder is this again a case of regulators just getting comfortable with the technology and its application in this context? Will it be a precedent for other such blockchain-based developments for startups and incumbents? As Mark was saying, it's a regular source of blockage. Interesting.
There was some interesting news related to that because, you know, some of the background story, supposedly its co-founder, his name is escaping me at the moment. Yeah, he had made a speech about a few months ago where he basically slagged off the regulators in China, and he slagged off a lot of the key government bodies, which to some degree he gets away from it all because the Chinese are very proud of what he has achieved. You know, he's a success story for China. But at the same time, a lot of what the products are doing are financial related products that they don't quite have the right licenses. So it seems that this is payback for that speech, and they're going to dig out all these things to let him get away with. So it may not be really to do with, you know, whether there's something wrong with the platform or the proposition, but more kind of like payback, just pure human interaction again.
That's a very interesting point, Wally, because quite often this reason, right, is it's a card played to sort of to make people scared or to put them in a disadvantageous technical position because they don't always have an understanding of the law. So it's a bit of a trump card that you play. I'm not sure, as you say, if you dig down deeply, whether it really is a legal piece. But look at what's happening in the American elections now, right? The threat of these laws is enough to put everything into controversy.
Exactly. Well, on this note, we're going to bring this episode to a close. We've got a wonderful new episode with a guest also coming onto our show next week. Thank you very much, Mark and Rory. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week. And if you'd like to join our show, please don't hesitate to add a comment or send us a message. We'd love to have you on it. But for now, have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, and we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.